Hi everyone, Curtis with the Sundance 88 YouTube channel. It's been a while since my last video and I wanted to just reach out and say hi, and I wanted to upload some new content. Specifically, what compelled me to put together a couple thoughts here is the recent Watchtower Study article that was just recently considered. It was Study Article 19. It was studied actually in July of 2019, and it had to do with the Watchtower's policies on child sexual abuse. The name of the article was Love and Justice in the Face of Wickedness. And there's been a lot of YouTube videos that put a lot of commentary out on even on a paragraph by paragraph basis as it relates to these articles. Although this video is not going to get into that type of depth, one of the reasons that I wanted to put together this video, I wanted to share three hopefully concise thoughts with you. What I'm seeing is that there are a lot of people who are associated with Watchtower and Jehovah's Witnesses, active Jehovah's Witnesses, that as a result of the topics that were brought up in this particular article are doing a lot more research. So one of the things that they're doing is they're going online, they're perhaps Googling terms, they're watching videos that in the past they might have been a little bit hesitant to or reluctant to watch. And so I'd like to speak specifically to witnesses that are active witnesses that as a result of considering the topic that was in that Watchtower article about the Watchtower's policies that relate to child sexual abuse and their handling of it, I'm not going to try to put together my particular opinion. What I'd like to do is I would like to offer some food for thought so that as you continue to research the topic, that maybe there's some things specifically that you might find helpful to put as part of your research as you consider this. So that's the spirit with which this video is offered, and hopefully a couple of these three key points will be something that you wanted to take some additional, make some additional research on. So as you would expect, a topic that is as impactful and problematic as policies having to do with child sexual abuse, there's no way that a 1 hour study article is going to be able to cover all the intricacies and nuance of something that's so involved. So you would expect probably that the article itself is going to be a little bit more of an overview with a sprinkling of some biblical principles perhaps from Watchtower's perspective that are presented to the congregation so that they can at least have an awareness of the topic. There are a lot of witnesses who are being forced to be engaged with the public when they're at literature carts and witnessing carts to talk about the topic. And you can tell by the response of many of the witnesses at these carts that they're clearly uncomfortable talking about it, and they feel that they're being confronted and personally attacked and being personally forced to justify the policy of the organization that they're out on the sidewalk representing. If you are an active witness and you're researching this topic, one of the things that hopefully you will have already looked at, and if you haven't already, would be the Australian Royal Commission into child sexual abuse that happened in 2015. And specifically, case study 29 was an inquiry into the policies that the Watchtower organization or Jehovah's Witnesses have as it relates to child sexual abuse. So if you haven't looked at that, that's a wonderful place to start to begin familiarizing yourself with a lot of the topics that were brought up in this article. When you're looking at those videos about the Australian Royal Commission, it is noteworthy to understand that one of the governing body members was interviewed and inquired of as a result of case study 29. So the governing body member in question, as you probably know, was Jeffrey Jackson. And the council asked Jeffrey Jackson, while he was under oath, whether or not child sexual abuse was something that was problematic throughout the world, which he accepted. He said yes. And it's also a problem within the Jehovah's Witnesses organization. And he also said that, he was kind of begrudgingly admitted that, yes, indeed, it's a problem around the world and a problem that we've had to address as well. Kind of a big admission. So to put a little bit more of an underline under that, the council was asking Jeffrey Jackson, would he accept that many of the efforts being made by different organizations, governmental organizations and others that are trying to highlight the issues of child sexual abuse and to try to find solutions, are these efforts real and genuine efforts to improve the problematic situation? And in response to that question, Jeffrey Jackson said that, yes, I do accept that, and that's why I'm willing to come here and to testify. The follow-up to that question was, do you accept that efforts to be able to find solutions are not an attack on your organization or your system of beliefs? To which Jeffrey Jackson replied, I do accept that, yes. And so for there to be no mistaking the issue, the next question was, do you accept that the commission's efforts are genuine and well-intentioned? I certainly do, was the response of Jeffrey Jackson. So again, if you haven't seen the direct testimony, you may, as an active witness, be more inclined to watch a channel or watch an account of that testimony that doesn't have any commentary on it. I don't want anybody to feel that they are being attacked or their system of beliefs is being attacked. Just as a statement of facts, you might want to take a look at the videos that are available so you can get the entire context of the questions and the testimony of Jeffrey Jackson. It is absolutely well worth your time to be able to become familiar with the nuances of this topic and the Australia Royal Commission in the Commission into Child Sexual Abuse in case study 29. If you would at least become familiar with that, if you haven't already, it's obviously a great starting point. It was notable to me back in 2015 as I was watching that testimony is Jeffrey Jackson very clearly tried to help the commission understand that Jehovah's Witnesses and the Watchtower organization view the Bible as being their constitution. So all elements of the organizational standards and policies are presumably based upon their understanding of the Bible. So it is with that in mind that I think there are a couple topics that were not brought up in the recent Watchtower article that are biblical in nature, and I would like to simply offer those as a starting point for any witnesses that might still be active and are becoming acquainted with this topic, perhaps for the first time. There are 3 biblical things that I'd like to talk about, 2 of which were actually brought up during the commission and during their inquiry. From a practical standpoint, one of the lines of questioning that the commission pursued was to be able to understand the current process. So let's say, for an example, rhetorically speaking, that there was an accusation of sexual abuse within the congregation. The current state of the process and how that is handled is that 2 elders from the elder body would be assigned to investigate to see whether or not there's any validity of the claims. So part of that investigation, it was determined, was to confront the person who's been accused of that crime and to see whether there's a willingness for that person to actually admit that it happened. In cases where no admission of guilt is forthcoming, that's when we start to get into some problems for the Watchtower's existing policy. And one of the more problematic aspects of this is that somebody who has been the victim of child sexual abuse may not feel comfortable in many situations of being felt that they are on a tribunal where there are 2 men in a very private area, a very private space, let's say the back of a Kingdom Hall for an example, that are asking very, very pointed questions to be able to attempt to determine how valid is this claim. And so many victims, to avoid being in a situation where they have to not confess as much as to provide those additional details, and to do that in front of men is very, very intimidating. So the commission was asking, is there any possibility where a mature member of the congregation, a sister, could perhaps be involved in the early stages of an investigation to be able to interact with that victim, to be able to determine is there in fact any validity to the claim? So that's one of the things that was put forth as a very practical suggestion. Perhaps the process can be adjusted so that female congregants can be asked to assist in the early stages of determining the validity of a claim. It is in response to this practical suggestion that instead of being taken like, well, that's an interesting thing, maybe we've thought about that, or no, we haven't thought about it for the following reasons, or we've rejected it for the following reasons, the response of the governing body member, Jeffrey Jackson, was to immediately say, no, 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 no. That cannot take place because the Bible is very, very clear in stating that the only ones that are scripturally elders and can serve in the capacity as being an elder are men only. And he goes on to read scriptures which indicate that it is in fact, that the requirements for an elder is that they be a man. So instead of being open to the spirit of the suggestion, which is to say, is there some way that the existing process can be fine-tuned, it was immediately and abruptly just cut off at the knees. Nope, only a man can be an elder. But what was interesting is the fact that the Bible actually has scriptural evidence that might be a nuance in this consideration, and that is in the book of Judges chapter 4 and chapter 5. There is there's a precedent set where Judge Deborah was a judge of Israel. As a matter of fact, the members of the nation of Israel would take their issues to Judge Deborah for adjudication. So there is absolutely scriptural precedent where a female was involved in adjudicating problems and issues. So I thought that was interesting when I was taking a look at that testimony. Where was the citing of that scripture or of that passage of Judges chapter 4 and 5 in the recent Watchtower Study article? Does that in fact play any role at all? Was that topic brought up at all in the Watchtower discussion? Do you think that might have any practical application? It's something to perhaps look at and explore further. The next point that I'd like to talk about from a biblical standpoint, again, because Jeffrey Jackson indicated that the Bible is the constitution of Jehovah's Witnesses in the Watchtower, I think many witnesses will be familiar with the passage in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 4, that says that, speaking of Jehovah, that all of his ways are justice. He is a God of faithfulness who is never unjust. And so I'd like you to think about that for a moment. Let's assume that that is true. Let's say that Jehovah's ways are never unjust. When you reflect upon some of the thinking and some of the policies that were outlined in that study article recently, is any part of you thinking that I'm not seeing justice in the policies that are reflected by the organization? So in Deuteronomy chapter 22, this is something that was also brought up at the Australia Royal Commission that you would perhaps be well served in at least considering. Deuteronomy chapter 22 refers to a situation where if a man were to overtake a woman in a field where even though she screamed, there was nobody there to hear her scream, that when the situation came to light, that the man, the one who violated the woman, should be put to death, but that the woman should not. So there is a case very specifically of sexual assault and violence upon a woman that is outlined in the biblical narrative. And the result of that was that the circumstances played a role as being that validity to the claim. So if you were to familiarize yourself with that situation in Deuteronomy chapter 22, do you think that has any bearing at all in this discussion of Watchtower's policies and the way that elders handle child sexual abuse and claims of child sexual abuse? Where was the congregation's discussion of that situation? Because it does play directly into the policies of the Watchtower, that there are plenty of situations where a claim could be made and there might be no witnesses to the claimed event. And the circumstances surrounding the claim were to be considered. I think it's very interesting that was not a topic that was covered in any depth whatsoever. So it might be that's another avenue that you might want to refamiliarize and to bring to bear as you consider the policies of the Watchtower. So the third and final point having to do with scriptural precedents has to do with a thought that is commonly brought to a witness's attention. So if you personally have any situation where you feel that you were handled in an unjust fashion, or the problem that you had was not handled well, or maybe you have firsthand knowledge of somebody else who had a problem that was brought to the attention of the elders as representatives of the congregation, and it was handled just plain poorly. An elder will oftentimes tell a believing witness, there are a couple scriptures that would tell you to throw your burden on Jehovah. Let's leave things in Jehovah's hands. So one of the scriptures is Psalm 55:22, where it says, throw your burden on Jehovah and he will sustain you. And the latter half of that verse says, never will he allow the righteous one to fall. If that's true, if Jehovah will never allow the righteous one to fall, aren't there situations where you've been the righteous one, where you felt that you were wronged somehow, and the way that a matter was handled was not, you were not given consideration, and you were perhaps treated poorly? So an elder might know that, and they would share with you that scripture saying, well, have confidence that Jehovah will never allow somebody who is righteous to fall, because that's what he promises. So therefore, throw your burden on Jehovah. Leave it in his hands. And then another scripture that is often read to you with that same line of thinking is 1 Peter 5:7, which says, throw all your anxiety upon him. Again, speaking of Jehovah. So when you take the scripture in Psalms and you take the scripture in 1 Peter and you put them together, there is a policy, or an attitude, I should say, that active witnesses have, which is to, I'm going to just show my faith in Jehovah and his organization by allowing him to sort it out in his own due time. So therefore, I'm going to leave it in Jehovah's hands. So as an example, if you were researching the Australian Royal Commission, you will hear that as the elders and the branch representatives say that there are times when the default position of elders or other members of the organization is to leave it in Jehovah's hands. In response to that, then, I would like to respectfully offer some additional scriptural precedents for you to consider, to see whether or not, has there ever been an incident in the scripture, which is apparently the Watchtower's Constitution, or Jehovah's Witnesses' Constitution. Is there anywhere in your Constitution where we can find an example where somebody did not, quote unquote, wait on Jehovah? If you go to Numbers chapter 25, or alternately, if you do a topic search on the Watchtower Library about the biblical character of Phineas. Phineas, in the ancient nation of Israel, had a position that the modern day witnesses would probably equate with an elder or an overseer. So he was a priest. Numbers chapter 25 goes into the fact that wrong things are happening, that other members of the priesthood are doing things that they shouldn't be doing. They're just morally reprehensible and morally wrong. Now, Phineas is notable because he did not, in fact, wait on Jehovah to sort it out. He did not throw his burden on Jehovah. He was motivated, he had the moral courage to take action. Now his action, admittedly, is kind of gory, because in Numbers 25 it talks about how he actually physically took a lance or a spear, and he put an end to the sin or the crime by actually killing the people who are participating in it. Again, a very extreme example. So when you're researching that topic on the Watchtower publications, you're never going to see a situation where they're talking about Phineas and saying, so in imitation of Phineas, we should take matters into our own hands as far as actually putting somebody to death. Nobody is suggesting that. But isn't there a scriptural precedence where somebody who acted as an overseer did not wait upon time and did not wait upon Jehovah to, at some vague time in the future, well, you know, the direction we're given through Jehovah will at some point fix this problem? That wasn't what happened here. In Numbers 25, it showed that Phineas actually took action. And in response to that, how did Jehovah react? when you look at the rest of that chapter, it indicates that Phinehas was actually praised by Jehovah for, I believe the term was for tolerating no rivalry. So that when something bad was going on, he didn't wait for Jehovah to fix it. He took it upon himself as a representative of the priesthood to put an end to the situation. And therefore, how does that relate back to that Watchtower study? Did you see any consideration of that biblical topic? Do you think, when you reflect upon the policy that was presented to you in that Watchtower article, aren't there situations where a crime or the charge of a crime is brought to the attention of an elder, and that the morally proper thing to do was to put a stop to it, to bring law enforcement in because a crime has been committed? So some people who have considered that biblical account feel very comfortable with the fact that regardless of what the city or the town or the county or the state or the country or even whatever Watchtower's corporate policy is on a matter, something wrong is going on. A member of my congregation, a fellow worshiper of mine, and a helpless one at that, is being attacked. The morally proper thing to do is to take action. So those are the three thoughts that I wanted to share. Again, the reason I'm doing it is if you are an active witness, and the topic that was brought up in that recent Watchtower article, even though it was kind of a cursory overview of corporate policy, it's a topic that requires additional consideration. This is not a topic that can be covered in 45 minutes or half an hour or an hour. There's all kinds of different nuances. So if you are a witness and you are online and you're on YouTube and you're on Google and you're trying to do your own research, and even if that research involves the Watchtower online library, I just wanted to offer a couple scriptural nuggets, if you will, that personally I think have some bearing on this conversation. And I think that all of those three topics were not given any consideration or discussed at all in the recent Watchtower article. So if you wanted to pursue that, I would recommend that maybe those might be some areas for you to do some additional research. And to any active witnesses that might be watching my channel, thank you. This video is not intended to attack you. It's not intended to attack the organization or the place of worship that you go to. It's not to attack your beliefs. It's just to offer some additional thoughts in some areas of research that other people that are in the exact same situation that you are right now might have done that research a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So continue doing your research, and I applaud you for your willingness to come online and to consider a brief video like this. So thank you so much for your time and consideration, and we'll see you next time.